Hello, we're with Kevin Annett, who is the field secretary of the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State. Welcome, Kevin.
Hello, Alfred.
We're very happy to have you here again for an update on the activities of the tribunal and the International Courts of Common Law and Justice, especially now that we're in 2014. So we understand that in fact there's a new action that's going to start in the common law courts of justice.
Well, that's right. It's there's local courts being set up around all sorts of issues, but the main court in Brussels has decided that the second case that they're going to pursue is having to do with the present Pope, Jorge Bergoglio. And there's two reasons for that. First of all, the very fact that he's a Jesuit, the first Jesuit in history to be a pope, is very important when this was being talked about among the judges and others in Europe. Because the Jesuits, of course, have been at the center of genocide and all of these crimes for at least 400 years. And Jorge Bergoglio himself has a whole very sordid track record when it comes to do with child trafficking. And we know this because recently we've discovered that a former member, he's actually not in the junta, but he was in the government during the Dirty Wars, has inside information on the specific activity of Bergoglio when it had to do with trafficking the children of political prisoners in Argentina, which was a common practice of the Catholic Church. They did it in Spain under Franco. Over 500,000 children were grabbed from the political opponents of Franco. They did the same thing in Argentina. Bergoglio was involved in that. So the next case in the docket of the Common Law Court will be looking into Jorge Bergoglio, the historical role of the Jesuits, and especially their involvement in child trafficking globally. So that's a very exciting development, especially considering all the efforts the Vatican's now making to make it seem like this guy is, some kind of beneficent figure. It's quite the opposite.
Right. Now, also at the UN level, you've had some contact with an NGO, correct?
That's right. I'm going to New York this week. This is January 15th. And this weekend I'm giving some lectures in New York, but I'm also meeting with at least one organization at the UN. They have NGO status there. And they have been working with us for about a year to try to develop a proposal to take to the UN to revoke the diplomatic status of the Vatican at the United Nations on the grounds that under the UN Convention on Transnational Criminal Organizations, the Vatican clearly meets the standards of what a transnational criminal body is, in that they launder money for criminal bodies, they traffic human beings, they protect those who do by their Vatican canon law policies, which the present Pope Bergoglio has reaffirmed. On that basis, they should not have diplomatic status. And not only that, not only at the UN, but governments will also be approached to annul their diplomatic ties with the Vatican, and to end the financial concordats whereby taxpayers' money from over 100 countries is channeled to the Vatican Bank. So, in other words, it's a matter of the UN making a clear statement that they will not condone a criminal body like the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church.
Right. Now just to show how the Vatican continues to hold itself above international law, which is a recent pronouncement by the current Pope.
Yep.
There's a case of the Polish Archbishop and a fighting an extradition. Could you go into that?
Well, his name's Joseph Wesolowski. He's an archbishop from Poland, and for a number of years he was the papal nuncio, or the so-called ambassador to the Dominican Republic. When he was there, he was involved basically in not just protecting child rapists, which is the standard role of an archbishop or cardinal. They do it all over the world. They have to under canon law. But Wesolowski was also involved himself, apparently, in abusing children, and young boys especially. The Vatican this week tried to block the efforts of the Polish government to extradite him on the grounds that, well, he's a Vatican citizen, not a Polish citizen, which is not true under the international law. But they are claiming that they have jurisdiction over Wesolowski, and they say, oh, we'll try him in a Vatican court. That's just what came out today, that under this July 11th apostolic letter, Jorge Bergoglio, Pope Francis, said that offenders against Vatican law will now be tried in Vatican courts. It's their way of saying that we're not subject to any other court, that we're going to do our little in-house investigation and trial of our own, and as often happens, they'll have the wrist slapped and he'll retire to some nice monastery somewhere. And in other words, he's not subject under civil law to harming children. So it's another polite way for the Vatican to circumvent the law and to protect child rapists.
Right. Now, you were giving recently some background as to how exactly the Vatican and other churches have been able to use the power of the state in North America and in Europe and in other places around the world, really to acquire power over people, acquire power over families, and continue to do so. Could you give some of that background now?
Well, I mean, it happens on a whole number of levels. And they often say, well, money is power, and the source of the power of the Vatican, of course, doesn't come from God or any spiritual deity, because if so, they wouldn't need money in the first place. But the financial concordats I mentioned, first of all, not just the $50 billion plus that comes out of the collection plate every year, but these agreements whereby not only is Catholic property tax-free, they also enjoy these direct subsidies from the state of over 100 countries, where your and my taxpayer tax money goes directly to the Vatican Bank without any accountability at all. As a matter of fact, our people in England, when they approached the members of Parliament and asked for some details about the financial concordats, they said that was confidential information. We couldn't share it. So, I mean, these are secret deals being done all the time. And, at the level 2 of the corporate investments of the Vatican, one of the more notorious ones being their deep involvement in Monsanto and genetically modified organisms, which the Vatican supports, by the way. They support GMOs. They don't see anything wrong with them. It goes on and on. I found from my own experience that this protection doesn't constrict itself to the Catholic Church. But when I was tossed out of the United Church of Canada, no court would hear my case. No civil liberties group would approach it. They said basically the church is a law unto itself and can do whatever it wants to its own employees. So, I mean, it's at all of those levels as well.
Now you were talking about when the government, just switching for a moment to the government of Canada
Mm-hmm.
and to the United Church of Canada, that the government of Canada set up the United Church of Canada as a bank, right?
Well, that's right. All you have to do, go to the any Google search, look up the United Church of Canada Act, first put in first reading in Parliament in the fall of 1924, finally passed in 1925, I believe. And when you look at its, the articles in that act, it gives the United Church definitely the powers of a bank. It could issue promissory notes. It could be involved in land transactions. And basically operate in that way. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense at first until you realize that as missionaries, the United Church, like with the Catholics, were often the first onto indigenous land, so they could act as land brokers. And we saw that if people go to hiddennolonger.com, a notorious case of that having to do with John Sheepshanks, who is an Anglican Church of England missionary, who was also a shareholder in something called the Puget Sound Land Company, set up by the Hudson's Bay Company in British Columbia, to grab a lot of native land. They preempted the land belonging to the Chilcotin people who used to live around Cornell, British Columbia. They preempted the land while over 9,000 Chilcotins were still alive. John Sheepshanks, the same month, went among them and inoculated them with so-called smallpox vaccine. 90% of the Chilcotins were dead that same year. And then guess who owned all the land around Quesnel, British Columbia? The Puget Sound Land Company. The missionaries did that all over the place. They acted as an arm of landed interests and companies using vaccines, the residential schools to wipe out over half the people. So this is kind of the bigger agenda, that the corporate church government triangle has always been really at the heart of genocide. And they had to ensure that legislatively by giving the United Church that same kind of power of, to be a financial broker. In the same way that when they set up the Indian hospitals where they were sterilizing Indians en masse and medically experimenting them, it was primarily the United Church that ran those hospitals, like the Nanaimo Indian Hospital, R.W. Large Hospital in Bella Bella, British Columbia, Thunder Bay, the Lakehead Psychiatric Hospital. It went on massively all over, especially the West.
Now, when you were a United Church minister here in Port Alberni, you noticed that although the local population was 1/3 native, there were practically no natives in the church. And what did that lead you to discover?
Well, I was kind of stupid and naive back then, and I figured, hey, this doesn't make sense. Maybe I should talk to the church about what's going on here. And it led me into the whole story of genocide. That was 20 years ago, over 20 years now. And it's like now in the Aboriginal community, the evidence is all there. All you have to do is sit down with a family, and if they trust you enough, they'll say, yeah, my relatives were killed, and we know where they're buried. We know the people who did it. All the evidence is out there, and that's what I was uncovering. But the added mix for me was I let them speak from my pulpit. And it also coincided historically when the first lawsuits were being brought against the United Church and eventually all the churches, Catholic and Anglican as well. But the first case in history was the one that led to the so-called Brenner decision in the BC Supreme Court, where the United Church and the federal government of Canada were both found equally liable for all of the crimes in the residential schools on the basis of a case brought by people who had been in my congregation, who I helped, bring this information out about. And so, it was interesting because when that legal decision came down, it also coincided when the church decided to, basically do a slam dunk on my life and try to totally discredit me all over the place, which worked for a little while. But, it's because that hidden history of genocide and as a land grab, the fact that these churches are still guilty of genocide and should legally be disestablished as criminal bodies. So, naturally, no organization is going to want their members knowing about that.
Yeah. When you say the churches should be disestablished, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, they should not be receiving taxpayers' money, for one thing. They should not have tax-exempt status, because that's forcing every citizen of a country, Canada in this case, to subsidize criminal bodies that planned the extermination of other nations, who deliberately exposed children over generations, not just 1 or 2 years by a few bad apples, but over generations. For over 50 years they did this in Canada. They took the healthy children and put them in the same dorm as kids dying of tuberculosis, locked the doors and never treated them. They used germ warfare to depopulate whole areas at the behest of the Crown and various companies. That's been proven. And yet not one person has ever gone to trial for the death of any of those children. In Canada, the United Catholic and Anglican Church get to set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that investigates themselves and gets to look like the Pope today does, as a really nice guy, as somebody who's trying to do the right thing when they've got mass graves all over the country where these children are still buried. And every time we try to look into that, the boot comes down on anybody who tries to do that, because the criminals are the ones in power.
So, but also what you're saying is that, for example, in the case of the Vatican and the Catholic Church, you're dealing with a body that is currently a criminal organization, right? Correct?
Exactly. And the Vatican is the more blatant example of that, because they've been at it the longest and they have the most money and support. But every church does that. There was a notorious case just a few years ago here on the West Coast where a known child raping individual he had a whole criminal record of that. He was hired at Camp Quamas, I think that was the name of the United Church Kids Camp in Surrey, British Columbia. The person there's another employee at the United Church camp who finds this out tells the church officials, she gets fired, just like I was. She got fired for reporting the guy. He carries on in his job. You know, I mean, so same old story. The whistleblower is targeted. The rapist is kept, you know, in power. The United Church minister Russell Crossley, actually in Victoria, British Columbia, he went to prison for raping women for over 30 years. The church officials kept moving him around. He got 6 months in jail. The whole time he was kept on salary, and they finally gave him a testimonial dinner after he retired in 2004. He was never defrocked, but I was, because I spilled the beans. So, I mean, it shows you where the moral priorities in these corporations are. And they need to be disestablished because not only losing the tax money, but they should not be legal entities in Canada. They should lose their legal status as bodies. And because anyone who involves themselves in a criminal body is complicit under the law, as is the government.
Now, this practice, switching over to the British Crown, in the UK, these issues now of targeting the whistleblower seem currently to be really pushing the UK Crown into illegal action, because they now have targeted supporters of the International Tribunal into crimes of church and state with unlawful psychiatric commitment. Is that correct?
That's right. The latest case is David Compan, who was an ITCCS member in Coventry, where they're really are taking the ball and running with it. Our group in Coventry, England, is now setting up a common law court. They've gone into Catholic churches, served arrest warrants on a suspected child raping priest. They posted the arrest warrant against the Pope in those churches, and as a result, they were all targeted. But David Compan, one of their members, was actually approached on his job, told that he had a psychiatric problem. This is the same week that he was posting up our notices about Elizabeth Windsor and other people's complicity in these crimes against humanity. He was taken into Charing Cross Mental Hospital in London. They held him there for examination. He finally escaped, but then the police in Wembley arrested his wife and are holding her in Wembley police station until he surrenders himself. They're doing this under a law in England that's called the Fixated Threat Law, which is completely Orwellian. It says that it's a way for the elites to protect themselves from any criticism, because it says if you are somebody who is fixated on a public figure, that is, you go to a protest more than once, you talk about evidence of people in office who have committed crimes, that means you have a mental disorder. When, common sense says, no, it's the other way around. If you aren't concerned about somebody consistently, it means you're kind of dissociated. You hear about these crimes, oh yeah, well, whatever, they can commit whatever crimes you want. No, it means that anyone who has a legitimate concern about people in high office who have committed apparently crimes, they've got a mental disorder. It's kind of like the Soviet gulags. Now that's a law now in England, and it's got to be revoked. Otherwise, England is an open police state where dissent is not just criminalized but considered a mental disorder.
Yeah, and just to ask you, just this past 2 weeks, and I asked this because of the coming common law courts of justice action against Bergoglio in Brussels. Just these past 2 weeks, an NGO, the European Coalition Against Covert Harassment, UCACH, their office in Brussels and their director there, Melanie Vritchan, was subjected to an attempted unlawful psychiatric internment. Fortunately, the psychiatrist would not go along with it because she had complete tests and evidence that and even though the 3 police tried to get the psychiatrist to sign off, the psychiatrist refused.
Right.
So and that was under the the aegis of a king of Belgium's warrant. So I just want to give you a heads up that you may want to warn the ITCCS personnel in Brussels that this is a tactic of the New World Order there now. Do you have any comment?
Oh, well, I mean, it's a scare tactic. It's designed to get people to not protest, to not speak out publicly or be part of these groups that are taking the lead in these actions. And it's not accidental that that's struck at Brussels, because that's where the main organization is based. It has an undisclosed address. The people tend to operate with pseudonyms who are connected to that. So, yeah, and as a matter of fact, I had heard about this case as well. I mean, when you mentioned it, people are aware of this. It's the more of the same, and if they can pick off prominent individuals like that, anybody it can be subject, like now, they can be. So, I mean, we have to rally around those people when that happens, and, not just Melanie, is that her name?
Yeah.
But the folks in Coventry, they need everybody now to be coming forward, and especially supporting their actions, like the setting up the convening of the Common Law Court in Coventry, which is happening as we speak. So I want to urge people to write to ITCCS. It's itccscentral@gmail.com. Right.
Now, we're now into 2014, and there seems to be an extraordinary amount of potential evidence coming out of third parties who seem to be very credible. For example, your witness from the Argentine government in the days of the Junta against Bergoglio, testifying to his role there in child trafficking during those years. The support at the UN to strip the Vatican of its role. Also, isn't the Vatican now answering charges in the European Union as to child trafficking?
Well, they are supposed to appear this week before a United Nations body in Geneva to give a detailed accounting of how they're dealing with child abuse within their own group, within the Catholic Church. And of course, it's kind of like the so-called Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, set up by the government and the churches. There's no accountability. There's no. It's not mandatory that the Vatican disclose anything. They're just asked for the cooperation. So it's like the old problem. There's no enforcement backing this UN call. The Vatican can share whatever they want, not be held accountable if they're hiding criminal evidence. It's like trying this Polish Bishop Wesolowski in their own courts. What's going to come out of it? Nothing. There's no fundamental change that's going to come out when the fox is guarding the henhouse. So that's why, again, we always come back. We need our own independent legal system. We need common law courts with enforcement powers, citizen sheriffs who have the power to arrest known child raping priests, and finding a way to pull the plug on Vatican finances. That's the way you affect people, through votes and money. And threatening. We found that in Canada. The churches didn't issue any apologies about the residential schools until the lawsuits began. This is what they understand: legal power and threats to their money, and losing public face. And that's why we continually urge people, go to Catholic churches, tell the parishioners and the people putting money in the collection plate the real story behind these criminals. That's the way to get to them.
Now, will there be any sort of an organized campaign in any country or in any jurisdiction to actually disestablish any of these churches, to take away their tax status?
We're campaigning in 21 countries now, Alfred. We've got groups. The most active groups are in America, Canada, and England, and also Ireland, although the group in Ireland was severely attacked, in the usual manner because they were being so effective. So we're rebuilding there. But, elsewhere we've got individuals pretty much acting alone, but it's time for people to unite now across these issues, across the divides, and the common law court allows people the chance to do that. For example, there's a common law court being set up in Vermont, in America, based on the work we're doing, which is trying to annul fraudulent mortgages. There's groups all over that are applying this to civil as well as criminal matters. So, this is a great idea because it's empowering citizens to be the law and to bring in the justice that obviously when the courts and governments are colluding with these criminal corporations and churches, you can't expect justice. We have to reinvent that.
Right. So, do you have any words for our viewers as to how they can get involved now in 2014 in the work of the tribunal if they wish?
Absolutely. Go to itccs.org. Look at the community common law community training manual there, which we posted. It's a 30-page document giving you the nuts and bolts as to what the common law is and how you can set up your own court. Write to me, hiddenfromhistory1@gmail.com, and use that itccs.org documents to start the ball rolling in your own community. You have to take the initiative yourself. There's not going to be any savior coming in here doing it for you. We are doing it ourselves. We've shown that you can depose a pope if you present the evidence and the truth right in their face. That's what we were able to do in 2013. Bring down not just Pope Benedict, but Tarcisio Bertone, the most powerful Italian cardinal, also resigned because of the pressure we're bringing to bear. That shows you what you can do. 2014 has even greater prospects in store. So really just urge people to act. And I'm on speaking tour now through America and then over in Europe in the spring and all through Canada as well. So we'll be carrying this on. Again, write to us, itccscentral@gmail.com, itccs.org.
Thank you. And we certainly want to thank you for taking the time to update us today, and we look forward to your coming again in the future to keep us updated as these developments occur.
Thanks as always, Alfred. I appreciate it.